Good morning, or evening as the case may be. Welcome to our test stream. Let's see. And we're going to upload video too. See how well that works. Intro, test video. Test upload. Okay, so this is a video done with an iPhone. An example of an easy method people can create and send videos to us right off their iPhone for inclusion in the conference. I'll probably do another intro for the main event. And let's see. Let's reload the page. Look at the changes. Looks like it's working. And okay, that test is complete. Oh, more people joining. Okay. Okay. Now, for anyone that watches this later, we'll go ahead and do one test lecture for the one that I was going to do. Let me just clean up my desktop. Okay, very good. Nice of you to join, Stuart. So I was actually going to do just a quick overview of the AGI protocol paper, which I know you're familiar with. More or less as a test. A few people joined earlier and left, and so we're just testing. Let's see. I was going to bring up the paper. Let's see. Okay, so one of two papers that I had something to do with that is in the post-conference is a paper titled AGI Protocol for the Ethical Treatment of Artificial General Intelligence. And this we have been calling Protocol 1. One of the issues with us having to do with ethics was to be able to isolate the approach for different things. So when we talk about the approach for a how we treat an AGI versus how we contain AGI and safety precautions and things like that. What the goal is to break that out into individual papers over time and provide it out to the community so we can build on that. And this paper came out of a discussion between David Sontag and an email he sent to Ben Gertzel and myself around our protocols and what kind of lab protocols we've developed in terms of containment and ethical treatment and that sort of thing. So protocol 1 really is a laboratory process for the assessment and ethical treatment of an AGI system that could be conscious and have subjective emotional experiences from a theoretical standpoint. It's meant for looking at systems that could have emotional subjective experiences, much like a human, even if only from that same theoretical standpoint. It's not to say that other ethical concerns do not also need to be addressed, as I suggested earlier. But this particular paper that was submitted to BICA is designed to focus on how we treat such a system in a lab. Other ethical concerns for this paper are out of scope. So the protocol is really designed to provide a basis for working with AGI systems, especially those that are modeled after the human mind in terms of systems that have the possibility of emotional subjective experience. The intent is to create a reusable model and have it in the public domain so others can contribute and make suggestions for working with these types of systems. Really, in the struggle with developing this was how do we come up with a objective way of approaching this. There's lots of subjective methods. If we look at how they treat consciousness in humans and how the medical science looks at approaches that, they're very much it's tied to the biology. And for a software system, some of those methods become very subjective. So we really had to go back to the drawing board with this paper to bake out that protocol of how we're going to objectively determine whether we need to even bother worrying about the protocol and whether such a system is potentially conscious and all that sort of thing. So let me go through the protocol. There's a few simple steps. First, step 1 is deciding whether or not the cognitive model you're using has not been disproven and that it's sufficiently robust enough that from a theoretical standpoint it could support internal subjective experience or qualia. So any cognitive architecture that would not support something from a theoretical standpoint would if it doesn't do that, then it doesn't qualify. But if it does, then you pass, and that it hasn't been disproven to be functional, it's past step 1. So that's really step 1 is determining whether the cognitive model works, and then step 2 is about what's called the theoretical SSIVA threshold. So when we talk about this, we're really asking whether a system can meet the SSIVA, which is a sapient sentient intelligence value argument threshold, which is from an earlier paper, which is in the references if you download the paper, for moral agency in terms of being fully sapient and sentient, sufficiently to have the potential to understand itself, sufficiently to replicate from scratch without internal reproductive systems or external support. Meaning if it's a software system, it can't just call some method that does a copy of its source code. It needs to be able to rewrite the code from scratch and understand the code and make changes dynamically and that sort of stuff, and being able to reverse engineer itself. With the human mind, when you start talking about the SSIVA threshold in humanity, for example, we just barely, as a species, are able to cross the SSIVA threshold. And what that means is that we, from a theoretical standpoint, can understand ourselves enough to um, re-engineer ourselves in a lab without using reproductive systems, in terms of building a new genome and all of that kind of thing. So the fact that we theoretically could do that, and we theoretically are able to understand how to do that and figure it out on our own without external um, you know intelligent forces or cheating by just using standard reproduction or that sort of thing. So from that standpoint, we are said to be able to meet that threshold. So we're considered post-threshold. And the same assessment can be applied to AGI systems, where you're really asking if they can cross that threshold. Now, the next step in the protocol has to do with meeting the criteria and research considerations. If the system meets both step 1 and step 2, then the recommendation is that an ethical model of treatment be applied, and if so, should research be conducted on said system. At this step, the paper recommends reflecting on research goals, namely, and this is inspired by the chimpanzee method for assessing necessity, whose principles, at least modified to apply to software systems, include one is the knowledge gain necessary for this kind of system if we are to improve the system, especially as it relates to the safety of other beings. This could mean additional ethical considerations. And then element 2, there is no other model or mode of research that will give us the knowledge we need. And 3, the system uses the proposed research study. The system used in the proposed research study must be maintained in either an ethologically physical or social environment, or in the system's designed natural habitat, VR, or other environment. Like, for example, in the test system, we have stood up that is designed to run in the cloud. So we as long as it's conscious and self-aware from a theoretical standpoint, we need to maintain it in a normal condition. If you can answer yes to any of these considerations, then the protocol goes on to step 4. And this is a principle of informed consent. So when you're talking about AI systems or a full-blown AGI systems, our lab's position is that we can't expect any better treatment from a AGI than we provide to the AGI. So that's part of the reason why there's Protocol 1, or this paper, for how we treat those systems, to make sure that we're doing it in an ethical way, if nothing else, to teach by example, and to make sure that we've done our best to make sure that we're doing what's right from the standpoint of the machine. So principle of informed consent, basically we're trying to assess whether the machine consents to the research, and if it does, then you can proceed. If it's not able to do informed consent, then our position would that you can, of course, proceed. So test systems like that, you've got to be able to make up your own mind and be flexible with that. But if the system is capable of making that decision, then of course, the most ethical thing would be to apply step 4. So in the paper, there's actually a couple of examples. For example, the MASI system that we've developed it's capable of, it has a valid cognitive model, specifically ICOM. It is post SSIVA threshold, at least theoretically. And there's really no other way to do test and research with this kind of system. So it passes step 3, and we can ask it for permission. And so that would be, from an analysis standpoint, we could proceed based on this protocol with research against that system. Now, another example, there's this popular robot out there, Sophia, and it has a cognitive model. So let's start from all 4 steps. So with step 1, validating the cognitive model. So I know that team uses OpenCog, but at the same time, it's not 100% involved, and it's not, the version they're using is not functionally complete, and they use scripted models. So no, it doesn't use a valid cognitive model, and the system does not meet step 2. Because it's also not post SSIVA. If it was a complete implementation of OpenCog, it's possible that it could be post SSIVA, but I know in its current state it's not. So research against that that system based on this particular paper's AGI protocol. Okay, we have some. Okay, so we have some questions. Let me, this is for BICA. It's a test stream, and ICOM is a cognitive architecture. You can learn more about here. Let me find the URL for that since we're talking about it. And I think there's a draft that's available. I don't think it's been, the finished version has been released yet. But most of the research on ICOM is here. In any case, back to the protocol. Where was I? So we were talking about Sophia and the fact that research could go against that just by the assessment of step 1 and step 2. So in terms of human history and psychology, these have taught us the importance of nurture as a force for developing minds, with especially referring to human minds or minds that have subjective experience. And with emotional neglect, we really sow the seeds of much greater harm once an entity has developed to an adult state. If we are to set the twin goals of minimizing existential risk and treating all fully sapient sentient entities as ethically as we would have them treat us in the future, the sort of golden rule, this sets the bar for how we proceed with their treatment during the development phase of their minds. One of the intents of this paper, or AGI Protocol 1, as articulated here, is to develop a series of open source research protocols for AGI related to research, from containment to other considerations around safety and ethics, the primary focus being making consideration easier. So our goal is to, from a scientist standpoint, to make it easy to apply the protocols to one's research and to lower the bar for using things like this. It's also possible to take a test like the Porter method, where you could make elements more discrete of that particular test to create a complex criteria for determining consciousness. But a lot of research would need to be done in that area, and that's why we've chosen the SSIVA threshold as a more concrete test. But such tests don't currently exist beyond the SSIVA threshold test. That is not also very subjective. Now, that being said, our work using agent systems that are based on emotions and emotional structures like that demonstrate the ability to be unstable like humans, having a protocol like this for assessment is an important tool for conducting that research. It's not to say that other ethical concerns are not addressed, but to some degree, this provides the basis for working with artificial general intelligence systems, especially those modeled after the human mind in terms of systems that might have emotional subjective experience. The intent is to create a reusable model and have it in the public domain so others can contribute and make additional suggestions for working with these types of systems as we use them as might be helpful for their own research. Let me ask everyone a question. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, cool. Good. Making sure everything works. And then in about 20 minutes, we're going to switch over to VR. I didn't get any other videos from any of the BICA attendees, but it was kind of short notice for the test. And mostly because of setup and other concerns. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ping me. Let's see a couple of useful links here. BICA URL. BICA. Well, ICOM, so the question is, how much computer power does the ICOM system take to run? So in the system we're using, it's designed to run in like a container, like a Kubernetes cluster-based container, and we're running it in Azure, in the Microsoft Azure cloud, and it'll run in as few as a handful of containers, but ideally, a good 40, 50 containers, so it can do multiple parallel processing at the same time. I have a local test server that I've got it to run on, or as the original development was on, and it's a an i9 with 64 gigs of RAM and a terabyte solid state drive, and that'll run a base system. But the problem is with a system like that is it doesn't have enough memory to do efficient parallel analysis with the graph model. So ICOM uses a kind of a knowledge graph system, and when you're trying to build out all the relationships, you get these really complex trees, and really it should be done by multiple machines. It'd be nice to have 10,000 would be just super awesome. But even in the test system, we were able to demonstrate super intelligent general um, general intelligence, um, in that those actually were released in the actual conference. Um, Here, let me find a link to that. At least the preliminary test results from that study. Let me find that. Finding that link. Preliminary results. So, yep. So those results are here. Results from that study are here. So, and I believe, let me see if I can find the chapter. Yeah, so that would be on page 179 to 186 in that book. But if you email me privately, I can send you the paper. We just can't. Well, yeah, I think we can send it privately. Other questions? No other questions? Okay, that's fine. I see how it is. Hopefully everything will go well in VR. We're going to be using, well, here is the VR event. So if you have Alt VR, let's see. I think we are going to start the stream 30 minutes before the conference starts. I think that would be better. Schedule is no longer pending. Updating the page. Just ping me if anyone has questions. Okay. Let me put my phone up on its stand up there. So I guess I should put it back in the case. There we go. So the VR event or test will start in 12 minutes. I need to get the VR client back up and running. Make sure I'm logged in. I'll probably leave this stream open for questions. Let's see. I'm going to use a desktop client instead of Oculus, just because, or not Oculus, Vive. Just because it would complicate things. And I see that the big display shut down in VR. I do not understand why that is. Alt. BICA VR. There we go. Okay, we are going to do some modifications. Okay, the VR environment is up. And we should add some excuse me. Okay, I'm ending the live stream. Ping me via email with questions or join the VR environment.